articles. We know it's good. We know what we want to find. Now we're going to talk about how to find them. And your most useful tool in this endeavor is search strategies. And these guide you to let you know what you're going to type into that little box in the search engine. The most common search is searching by topic. In that case, you simply type what you want to know into the search box and see what pops up. Sometimes this is good, sometimes it can be completely overwhelming. Now, it can be made more useful by by either making the search bigger or smaller by using Boolean operators. And I love that word Boolean. I don't know why. It just makes me think of Halloween or something like that. Anyway, Boolean operators are extra words that you might put in between two search words to make your search bigger or smaller. So let's say we want to know about cats and dogs. Okay, so if we used cats or dogs, it's going to give us a huge search. It's going to give us all of the articles on cats plus all of the articles on dogs plus all of the articles on cats and dogs. So that's using the OR. The OR gives us the biggest search. Anything that mentions either of those terms you get. Now we could narrow that term simply by changing that middle word to and. Cats and dogs. That gives us much, much fewer articles, but we're only getting the articles that talk about cats and dogs together. Now, that might not be what we want. Let's say we're thinking about it and we're like, forget those cats. Let's just look at dogs. So in that case, I would do dogs, not cats. And that would probably get us an intermediate number of articles, just the ones that mention dogs. Dogs and no cats. No cats could be mentioned anywhere. So that or, and, or not, those Boolean operators can be really useful. Sometimes they also can be useful to limit the type of article that you get up. I know occasionally when I've asked a cutting edge research question or something that's not as explored as I quite like it to be, I will end up getting a whole bunch of theses. That's master's theses and doctorate theses. Those are what people write to graduate with those degrees. And generally, they're not as useful because they're not technically peer reviewed. They're looked over by their advisors, but they're not reviewed as strenuously as articles. So I might put something in my search box like dogs, not dissertations, so that I get all the dogs that are not dissertations, or dogs not theses. I'd get all the dogs that were not, or the articles on dogs that were not master's theses. So sometimes that not can be really useful. The other way you can do it is search by author. And I talked about that a little bit when I talked about the substantive articles and the popular articles. Sometimes a news source or something will drop a name of a researcher that's really big in a certain area. So you can search that author's name and look at all the publications that they have written. Another thing that you might want to keep in mind is many scientists work together on teams. They leverage their research and what they know by working on teams. So sometimes, let's say you've got Jekyll and Hyde who are authors and they publish together. Sometimes you might write some articles that Jekyll wrote alone about that topic, and other times you might find articles that Hyde wrote alone on that topic. So if you're looking to find all the publications of a certain lab, sometimes you might want to search each author separately because they publish in different configurations, depending upon who worked on that article. So you can search by author. And another way that's really, really interesting is you can search backward. And by backward, I don't mean the back of your head in front of the computer, even though some days it probably feels like that. By backward, I mean backward in time. So let's say you're reading your textbook on infancy and early childhood, and you're reading this textbook and you come upon a really, really interesting research finding, and you say, I wonder if that works in humid climates or whatever. And so you might want to go look up that original article and get a look at it and see what they did and see if you could improve upon it in your project. So in that case, you would just go backward. You would go backward to the bibliography of your textbook, get the exact citation for the article, and look it up that way. The easiest way to do that is just put the whole thing into the search box. The other thing that can be very useful, and in fact, it can be useful in combination with the other searches, is to search forward. Because we know that we want the latest and greatest information available. We know that science builds upon each other, and we want to find everything that's cited an original article to see what's happened since then. And that's called searching forward. And it's searching forward because it's searching through time. So the easiest way to do this is to use a search engine. I know Google Scholar does it, and I'm pretty sure that OneSearch does it, to search forward in time. So let's say I find a classic article by Mary Ainsworth, and I know it cites her theory, and I might want to look what has happened since then. What people have cited that article, and what have they done since then? So in that case, I would type in the classic article I find. And it doesn't even have to be classic. It can be something that's being mentioned in a textbook, because textbooks aren't the most recent sources of information. It can be something a theory that you like and you know about. It can be all kinds of things that you search forward from. So you type that article in, and there's usually a box on the search engine that says, find all articles that have cited this article. So you get all of the articles that used the evidence and the information from your first article, your seminal article, and you search forward in time. And that can be really, really useful. Also, sometimes a combination of both. So search backward. Let's say you find something in your textbook and you search backward to find that article, and you're like, oh my gosh, this is so interesting. But this study was published in 1995, and I know Jan Kura is not going to let me get away with citing some article that was 25 years old. I want to know what's happened since then. So you start with that article that was written in 1995 that you found by searching backward, type it in, press the button, and you can see all the things that have cited that article going forward. So those are some strategies that can be really, really helpful. So what do you do now that you've got your articles? And this always reminds me, when I was a little kid, we had a dog named Bruno, and Bruno was a full-size dachshund, and Bruno was the greediest dog I've ever known. He was greedy. He was a crazy dog. And we also had a doggy door in the back of our house, which means that, the little door that the dog can run in and out of the house to the backyard, so they can do whatever dogs do in the backyard. Well, Bruno, for some reason, used to chase airplanes. So every time an airplane would fly over our house, he'd bark crazy, rah, 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 go out and bark at the airplane. And we just thought that was just the funniest thing. We thought it was even more funnier the time my grandpa came over and he said, Bruno, what are you going to do if you catch one of those things? And so I always think of that when I talk about evaluating articles. What do you do now that you've got your articles? Sometimes you feel such an accomplishment that you found the right articles, but unfortunately, your task isn't over yet. You got to read them. So now I'm going to give you some tips on reading articles. This is my quick and dirty method. If I have a paper copy, I use a highlighter. If I have a non-paper copy, I open up the highlighter on my computer or something to find the most important parts in an abstract. And really, now this takes me under a minute because I know how to find the parts. It'll take you a little bit longer, but it can really help you get a sense for your article before you dig into it. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to identify the research hypothesis. So what are these people testing? What did they want to know? Then you're going to identify the variables, and those will be embedded in the research hypothesis, and we'll do more and more of that as time goes by, so you get to be pretty good at identifying the variables. Then you're going to identify the sample. Is it transferable to the sample you're interested in? Is it generalizable? That can be really, really useful. And then you're going to note the findings. Does it provide evidence for your hypothesis? Or does it give you something to think about that you might tweak your hypothesis a little bit? So that's read the abstract, get an idea of what the study is about before you delve in. Now, when you delve in, it will be useful to know that scientific articles, except for review articles, all follow the same structure, always. So if you know this, it's really easy to figure out where what you want to know is located in the article. It also makes it much easier to write an article because that way you know what goes where. So it starts with the abstract, with which ironically you always write last, but we'll talk about that later. After the abstract, the abstract is just a summary. After the abstract, the real article starts with the introduction. And the introduction is, if you think about it, it's the rational part of the article. It uses all of the evidence that you found from articles in the library and on your literature search to explain why you predict the relationship between or among your variables. So the introduction, sometimes called the literature review, is just simply explaining why you think your prediction about your hypothesis is correct. So you want to read the introduction with an eye to the variables. If you get a little more into the research, you can take into account the history of the constructs. The introduction sets the stage for the rest of your study. It explains why you use the hypothesis you did. So the section will end with a hypothesis. And in your paper, the hypothesis is usually going to be the very last statement in your introduction. And it's that way in most research. Sometimes it's in the second to last statement, and sometimes it's in the last paragraph. In any case, it's at the end or very, very near the end of the introduction. And remember, a hypothesis is a testable prediction. After the introduction comes the methods section. And that does exactly what you think it does. It tells you the methods, the scientific tools that the authors use to answer their questions. And the methods section in a social science article and in many, many other articles has 3 subparts. So you've got the methods section, which is a big section, and the method section has 3 subsections. There's the sample and participants. It tells you who took place in the study, how you recruited them, and basic characteristics about them. So that's the sample and participants, tells you everything about the participants in the study. Second is the measures. And hold the measures section kind of in your head because we're going to talk about them a lot in the next couple of lectures. But the measures sections are simply how did you measure your variables? What questionnaire you used? What observation method? What did you count for? How did you define your observations? How did you measure your variables of interest? So that's the second part, the measure section. Then the third part is the procedure, and that's how you tell people how you designed your study. So it's not a step-by-step thing. You don't tell people everything you did to do your study. You say, this is how we conducted our study, and it's usually the research design. So for example, in that article I was just talking about, where Amy did the Grand Care self-efficacy of the grandparents, we had a pre-post design. So we told people, we gave the grandparents and the grandchildren questionnaires on their first meeting and their last meeting. So we had a pre-post design, and we might give them some other details. So procedure is basically telling people how you did your study, and the most important part of that is the research design. Okay, so we've done the abstracts, the introduction, the methods, which has 3 subsections: sample participants, measures, and procedure. Then we go to the results. And that's just the part with the statistics. And I will confess to you, when the first time I took methods when I was an undergraduate, just like you, I completely skipped that part. I had no idea what was going on. Now, that's the first part I go to, because it really is the meat of an article. So what I would like you to do, honestly, I don't think you're going to read every word, and you probably cry if you do. But I would like you to notice how they format things and how they report their statistics. And we'll talk about that one a little bit. So just skim over the results. And then finally, the discussion. And the discussion is the part where they tie it all together. It always starts of a statement of whether their hypothesis was supported or not. They'll tell you if their hypothesis was supported, and then they talk about why that is important in terms of what they discussed in the introduction. So the results wrap it all up. They also often, depending on the journal, include an implications section. And this is really important to you, to professionals, you future professionals who want to go work in communities and work in settings with real people. Implication sections tell you why this is important in the real world. For example, we found that dogs enhanced human wellness in our study, so the implication section would say everyone should have a dog. Our study found that we should have more dogs in our communities, or something like that. So the discussion often includes just a couple of sentences on why this is important in the real world. So now that you know this structure, and I recommend that you memorize this structure, because it's going to make your life so much easier. You've got the abstract, the introduction, the methods, the results, and the discussion. And going back, the methods generally has 3 subsections: sample participants, measures, and procedure. And each section does, as I talked about before, and these couple of slides are going to go into this in a little more detail, each section does a specific thing for the study. So the introduction introduces the topic, and as I said before, tells you why you decided on the hypothesis you did. So, and it generally follows the structure of general to specific. So often the first thing you'll see in an introduction is a statement getting the reader's attention. For example, when I'm writing about grandparents raising grandchildren, I might say there are over 5 million children in this country today who are being raised or live in the same household as their grandparents. Okay, that tells them that I'm going to talk about grandparents, and it's a big deal because there's a lot of them in this country. Then you're going to look at what research is cited. And as I mentioned before, the research that you find in this section can help you with your section. So keep an eye to what you would like to know more about and search backwards. You see, note the article in the text, how it's cited in the text, then go back to the bibliography or the reference page and see if you can find that article, because it might help you with your study. You know, when I first started reading articles, seriously, I started reading them seriously in grad school, I would always find the topic sentence. Highlight the topic sentence, because this kind of writing is so dense that you can kind of, while you're trying to figure out what it's saying, you can forget what it's talking about. So you want to start by identifying the topic sentence in each article. Don't get all caught up in the little stuff. identify the topic sentences in each paragraph and see the overall argument. After you understand that, you can go back and really look at the details because they're helpful. But when you first start in, you want to look at the topic sentences. Look at the themes. Look at the big relationships between the variables that the researchers are talking about. You also want to pay attention to what do the authors say about their research. Why is it important? Is it going against the results of another study? Is it strengthening evidence from the results of the other study? You want to know where in all those articles about that topic this one fits in. And then, of course, note the hypothesis. And I also want to say that in professional articles that you find, there will be more than one. But you guys will only have to do one. So note that in the introduction. That's the first part. Okay, in the methods, you're going to want to pay attention to how the variables were measured, the strengths and weaknesses of measurement. In addition to those written there, you're going to look at who the sample was and how the study was conducted. The results, as I said before, you can just skim over it. I really don't want you to get bogged down in statistics for now. You can spend your time better on other things at this stage in your research career. And then the discussion. You want to note the following. You want to note the author's interpretation of their results, the limitations of their studies, the suggestions for future research, and the implications. So there's a couple little nuggets of information in here that will probably be really helpful to you. The first one is the author's interpretation of their results. And I said it before another way. I said that the discussion section, the first part of the discussion section, will tell you whether the hypothesis was supported or not. So, and I'm laughing now, but I told you at first I really didn't understand the results sections. It took me a while to become comfortable with them, with all the statistics and stuff. So I would skip the results and then realize that in the first paragraph of the discussion section, the authors always say whether their hypothesis was supported. So I didn't have to rely on the results section. I could go straight and look at that first sentence and they tell me that their hypothesis was supported or not, whether it was true or false. So that should be right up at the front of your discussion section. Then they spend a couple of paragraphs telling you why. How does that fit with what they wrote about in the introduction? And then after they've kind of wound down that discussion a little bit, studies typically end with some or all of the limitations of the study, the suggestions for future research, and the implications for the real world. And these are really great for you as students, because if you want to do research, what better way to figure out to do research is to make up the limitations of a previous study, do something that the researchers suggested, or do something that can look at something that can make this research more effective in the real world. So for example, let's say you're reading through the study and the limitations say that this research found what we thought, yada, yada, yada. Then it says, however, it's not generalizable to Native Hawaiian, Asian, and Pacific Islander populations. Boom! You have a Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, Asian population right at your fingertips. Why not see if it holds up for that group, that really important group? So sometimes you can find really great ideas in the limitations section. Now, of course, you wouldn't want to just do that because you're in this population. You would want a deep understanding of, and not deep understanding, but you would want some understanding of some of those cultures and have passion for helping those cultures and seeing how that they can benefit from research. So you don't just do it because they're there, because that's